Behind the Attic Wall by Sylvia Cassedy, Chapter 3. It was always the same, the first meal on arrival day at a new boarding school. She would stand a long while in the doorway of the dining room, crowded with girls all dressed alike, all talking, all shouting, all clattering their metal trays against the long metal tables. Soon, though, a few girls, those near the front of the room, would catch sight of her and fall silent. Then little by little the silence would move out in a ripple toward the opposite wall, and in time everyone would be still, staring intently at her. The new girl, the stranger. There would be no place set for her, and she would stand in the doorway even longer while someone was sent for an extra chair, and someone else went for a tray with a plate and fork, and there would be no space for her chair, and she would wait while a row of girls would squeeze closer together, and finally she would walk to her new place at the corner, where the table edge would jut into her chest and its legs bump her knee. She continued to follow Uncle Morris down the hall with its dark, silent walls until he stopped at last at a closed door, and she listened for the lunchroom sound she knew so well, voices mostly, but clattering too, and the crash of a chair. The next minute the door was open, and Maggie stood in a room with no one else in it at all. A long table, longer than any Maggie had ever seen, and not made of gray metal but of polished wood, stood at the center of the room. It could have seated all 18 girls in her class at the school she had just left. But there were only 4 chairs, one at each side, and 4 plates. A large chandelier hung from the ceiling, but it was not lit. The only light entered from 2 slender windows at the far end of the room, casting white oblongs, thin and cold, on the bare floor across the table. Suddenly a swinging door swept open, and one of the great aunts, the one in green, came in with a tray of platters and bowls. In a moment she was gone, and the other aunt, the brown one, came in through the same door with a tray of her own. Back and forth they moved, first the green one, then the brown one, like little figures that tell weather by popping in and out of a tiny wooden house. Maggie was seated on one long side of the table, facing Uncle Morris. The aunt in green sat at the window end, and the aunt in brown sat at the other. Where, though, was everyone else? In some other lunchroom, probably. She was being given special treatment because this was her first day, and she was allowed to sit with the headmistresses in the formal dining room while the rest of the school crowded around metal tables in some basement lunchroom. She strained again for the sound of voices, but there was silence all around. Maybe everyone else had already eaten. She suddenly realized that she had no idea what time it was. Maybe they had all eaten hours ago at this very table and were now hidden in upstairs rooms or scattered across unseen lawns. She stared into her plate, mashed potatoes, peas, a fried egg, a folded slice of bread and butter. To one side stood a mug of milk, a boarding school lunch. She lifted her fork. In 2 minutes she could take care of the whole thing, beginning with the egg yolk, which she stabbed at fiercely with her fork until it burst. Silently she watched as it bled across its surrounding white film and onto the plate. Sticky yellow blood, she thought, and she rubbed it dry with the edges of her bread. Next, the potatoes. In one movement she swept them into a narrow wreath around the edge of her plate and buried everything else in their depths, the peas, the egg, the folded bread, stained yellow now and beginning to shred. In a moment the center of her plate was clean, and the 2 aunts would think she had eaten most of her meal. "Harriet!" the aunt in green cried across the length of the table. "She isn't eating at all! She is taking no nourishment into her system!" Uncle Morris scrambled to his feet. "A toast!" he cried, and he raised his water glass so high it almost collided with the crystal teardrops hanging from the chandelier. "A toast to Margaret Ann Turner and to her system! May they spend many happy years together!" He waved his glass several times as though he were writing something in the air with it, and then put it to his lips. The 2 aunts looked at him for only a second. "One shouldn't wash down one's food with liquid," the green one snapped. "Food cannot be properly digested unless it is properly chewed." "What a lovely sentiment," Uncle Morris exclaimed, sitting down again. "Is that something you just made up, Lillian, or did you steal it from a book of Proverbs?" "Morris, be still!" the aunt in brown said, and they all fell silent. Maggie stared at the pattern of birds and flowers that she had revealed on her plate. In the other schools there were no patterns on the dishes, and the silverware was plastic. She held up the silver fork, sticky now with egg yolk, and examined the heavy scrollwork on its handle. Then, with its prongs, she ran a wavy row of ridges around the surface of the mashed potatoes, in and out, like tire tracks in the snow. "Lillian," the brown aunt said, speaking across the length of the table, "look how she eats! She has no manners," the green aunt snapped. "She will have to be taught." She raised her head and began to speak as though she were on a platform. "It behooves us all," she proclaimed, "to respect the sensibilities of others by observing proper table manners at all times." Behooves. That was headmistress talk. It behooves each and every one of us to keep our classrooms clean. It behooves us to treat one another with common courtesy. It behooves us to shut up. Behooves? Uncle Morris put his fork down. Behooves? His voice was unbelieving. Maggie, did you hear that? Bees with hooves? All those bees out there galloping around on hooves, while we just sit here at the dining room table, calmly eating our lunch. Think of what will happen to the flowers. Finish eating, Maggie. We must go and rescue the roses before they all get bruised. Morris, stop being tiresome, the aunt in brown ordered. And for a long time nothing further was said. The two aunts bobbed over their plates like birds at a fountain, and Maggie spent the time trying to work a chocolate bar out of a pocket of her skirt. It had been given to her as a going-away present the night before by one of the girls at her old boarding school. It wasn't exactly a present. She had taken it, but the girl said she could have it anyway. Keep it, the girl had said, for good luck. It had been her only goodbye. The cab that had come to take her to the station had been called for the night before, and she had left before anyone else was up. The candy bar felt soft now. Its chocolate ran against her fingertips as she held it behind her back and undid the wrapper. "Lillian," the aunt in brown said suddenly, "explain the rules." The rules. There were always rules. Usually they were hung on a sheet of paper inside the bedroom door. No eating anywhere except in the dining room. No going to the parlor. No talking after 10 o'clock. No leaving your towel on the bathroom floor. No this, no that. "There will be rules," the aunt in the green was saying now, Aunt Lillian. Green Lillian, brown Harriet. Green Lillian, brown Harriet. Tomorrow, though, they'll be wearing different clothes, and Maggie wouldn't be able to tell them apart. She looked more carefully at the green aunt and noticed that she had freckles. Thousands of freckles, in fact, all running together along her arms. Once, long ago, she had been told, by whom, her real mother maybe, that freckle fairies came through the windows with tiny paintbrushes dipped in gold and speckled the noses of little children as they lay asleep. She thought now, instead of a whole army of grotesque elves squeezing their paint pots and heavy brushes through the narrow windows of this massive stone building to stain her aunt's fleshy arms brown and tan, the colors of her old school clothes. "There will be rules," Aunt Lillian with the freckles was saying now, "and they will be strictly adhered to." Maggie looked back at her plate. "You are permitted only in certain designated areas of the building." Next would come the part about no eating in the bedroom. "There are rules about food and drink," the aunt in brown put in. Brown. Harriet. Maggie turned to look at her. She was thinner and more wrinkled than her sister. The skin at her throat hung in folds like unpressed silk, and heavy lines like pencil strokes framed her mouth. She would be the meaner one, Maggie decided, but it didn't matter. Mean or nice, it was all the same. She would hate them both, and they would hate her. In fact, they already did. "You will drink from 8 to 10 glasses of water each day," Aunt Harriet was saying, "and visit the bathroom every morning before breakfast." Maggie stared at her. "You will eat a serving of protein at every meal," Aunt Lillian said from her end of the table, "and plenty of green and yellow vegetables every day." She pronounced vegetables with 4 syllables. Vegetables and protein with 3. Protein. "Milk or a milk product 3 times a day, and carbohydrate twice." Maggie stared now at Aunt Lillian. She had seen all that somewhere on the side of a cereal box, and she wondered for a moment if her aunt were reading aloud. "Carbohydrates line the tubes." What kind of rules were these, anyway? No place had rules about carbohydrates and yellow vegetables. 10 hours of sleep each night. You may listen to the radio for an hour after dinner. There is no television. Television weakens the mind." All boarding schools had television. You could watch it for only a couple hours after dinner, maybe, and if you were being punished for something, so that you couldn't watch it, maybe, and you were usually being punished for something so that you couldn't watch it at all, but still, it would be there. What kind of place was this? You will dress according to the weather, and not the calendar. Warm leg coverings on cold days, and a woolen hat that covers the ears. Rubbers when it rains. You will not take anything unclean or unhealthful into your system. Maggie brought the candy bar up to her lips now and ate it all at once. She scraped the last streaks of chocolate from the wrapper with her teeth, and then, crushing it into a jagged ball, let it drop behind her chair to the floor. Finally, she sucked the chocolate slowly from each finger, making loud kissing noises as she did so. Both aunts rose. Look what she's doing! She's a disgusting child! The sweetness stung her throat, and she took a quick gulp of her milk, but the next moment she slammed the mug down on the table, her lips and gums burning. It's hot! She cried in surprise. They were the first words she had spoken since she had entered the dining room, and her voice cracked halfway through. The milk is warm, Aunt Lillian explained, not raising her voice. The chill has been taken off. Cold milk shocks the system. Remember that. Maggie gazed first at the two aunts, and then at the thin ring of food edging her plate. In the next moment she seized her mug of milk and emptied it into the design of birds and flowers. A creamy pond rippled against the banks of potatoes, and a pea set sail uncertainly to the opposite shore. It's hot! She shouted. Both aunts rushed toward her. She's ruined her meal! Aunt Harriet cried. All that nutritious food! Don't offer her any more. Let her go hungry until she learns. But she is malnourished. It can't be helped. Take her to her room. Then Uncle Morris spoke for the first time since he had been silenced earlier by Aunt Harriet. He gazed steadily at Maggie, struggling now as Aunt Lillian lifted her by her elbow and led her out of the room. I think, he said slowly, and she felt his words at her back, I think that you are the right one after all. But she didn't pay his attention to his words for until a long time later. And that's the end of Chapter 3.